Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's MMASC Spring Webinar Series, Preparing for Recovery, presented by HdL Companies. My name is Izzy Murguia. I am MMASC's immediate past president, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's session. Before we delve in this morning, I'd like to first take a moment to introduce MMASC's president this year, Tanya Spiegel, for a few opening remarks. Tanya?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is an exciting time for us here within MMASC to continue our opportunities to provide these webinars. I really appreciate HdL and their partnership and their support of this. And thank you, Barry. I think you said earlier, 25 years ago, you were president of MMASC. So it's always wonderful to have our past colleagues be able to come back and be able to give us some learning tips. Otherwise, thank you guys, and I'll go ahead and go on the back end now.
Thank you, Tanya, and thanks for joining us this morning. As Tanya mentioned, we are joined by three expert panelists on a very timely topic who will share why it could be helpful to prepare an economic recovery action plan, in addition to being ready with a strategy for the federal stimulus funding coming from the American Rescue Plan Act. So again, very, very timely presentation today. This morning's webinar is sponsored by HdL Companies. HdL Companies is a pioneer and leader of auditing, operations, and revenue solutions for public agencies with over 500 government agencies in 11 states, and also a MMASC corporate partner. Now I'd like to briefly touch on some housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the duration of this morning's presentation, please utilize the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring those questions throughout the presentation. We've reserved some time at the end of the presentation to address your questions, and we'll be monitoring those closely. Now, as I mentioned, this presentation we have with us three panelists. First, Barry Foster, who has 34 years of local government experience, including nearly 30 years in Southern California with the cities of Moreno Valley, Rancho Mirage, Monrovia, and Loma Linda. Mr. Foster has more than 27 years of economic development and development services experience in California. With HdL, Barry Foster started Econ Solutions and has worked with over 115 local governments. Wow, it's a mouthful. As Tanya mentioned, Barry's a former past president of MMASC, and we're happy to have him back. Next, we have Angela Tsui, who has more than 20 years of public sector experience, including more than 20 years working in economic development for the cities of Fremont, and most recently in Cupertino, where she was the economic development manager for 7 years. In 2019, Angela joined the HdL team as a senior advisor. Welcome, Angela. And lastly, we have Connor Duckworth, who has over 10 years of experience working for both state and local municipalities. He has provided political consulting to candidates on several issues and referendums. He is currently responsible for the development and implementation of business license tax and revenue-related products and services. Barry, Angela, Connor, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you. I think I'll go ahead and kind of kick this thing off, and it really is going to be a team effort on our part to kind of go through a PowerPoint and just kind of whet your appetite on how you really need to be prepared for economic recovery with a lot of different things. And so, you know, my background, and Tanya talked about it, that I was president of this organization 25 years ago. It was a long, long time ago, but I've had quite a journey. I worked in the public sector for 4 different cities in Southern California, and then went to work for HdL. It's been 7 years now, last week, and so I started up a division in the company to focus on economic development called Econ Solutions. And so we've done a lot of work, and so on the economic development side, for the past probably almost 14 months now, we've had to kind of pivot a little bit and deal with the pandemic. And so we've offered a lot of services to our clients to really help them weather the COVID-19 pandemic and ways to to deal with continuing to have businesses operate, to try to look at recovery, to deal with safety issues, just a lot of planning and to try to get through this. I think we all hope that we see that light at the end of the tunnel right now, but you know, and we're moving towards our governor saying that we're going to kind of reopen everything kind of more fully on June 15th. I think we're all looking forward to that, but there's still a lot of things that cities can do to be ready for that. During this last 14 months, you know, HdL's, we've helped cities with 3 different economic recovery action plans to deal with the pandemic, then a lot of kind of reopening plans for them. And then now we're really involved with a number of cities and helping them get ready for the stimulus money that's coming through the American Rescue Plan Act. And so there's a bunch of them that we're working with. There's much more that we're talking about doing that. We've been on all kinds of webinars and tried to get up to speed on what's coming. It's kind of like typical federal government. They have this, and the money's probably going to come before they have all the rules and regulations in place. But it really is important to be ready for it and to plan for it and anticipate that coming. So with that, if I can get to the first screen for the PowerPoint. And again, it's really, you know, important and critical for cities to be preparing for this recovery that's coming. We're not going to go back to the kind of the way it was 15 months ago before the pandemic. It's going to be a process that is kind of evolved, but I think cities really need to have put some effort into and have some planning to be ready for it. So we advocate doing, you know, having an economic recovery action plan in place to kind of help provide that framework. Then more importantly, to be ready for that American Rescue Plan Act funding that's coming in, and it could be here, you know, within the next maybe 10 days to 2 weeks. And so I think having that, looking at ways you can strategize for that and be ready for that is really, really important, but yet still be able to pivot and make some adjustments as you get down the road. Next. So an economic recovery action plan, and we've been involved with a number of these. And so really it's providing some framework in terms of looking at how you can get towards that recovery, kind of getting back to the way, a little bit more to the way that cities used to be and communities used to be. And so the pandemic really has impacted California cities from a lot of different perspectives. You know, certainly there's the health perspective, the social and the way that we've been interacting for the past 14 months, just the changes that we've had in our lifestyle and things that we've had to do differently in social distancing and not being able to go in restaurants and stores, you know, less than full capacity, and just, you know, the changing economic climate for our businesses has been huge, especially small businesses. You know, they're all looking at that light at the end of the tunnel and trying to get there. So doing an economic recovery action plan can really help guide a city to reopen its business community. I think it's a great thing to see that LA County now is going to move towards yellow. A couple of months ago, folks would have never thought that was going to happen anytime soon. And so I think that, you know, we're showing that people are getting vaccinated and we're kind of going towards that recovery. So I think being ready and planning for it really is important. You know, it's the action plan, the recovery action plan can really help you to work with your business community, especially small businesses, to really understand how they've been impacted and how you can help them recover. And then the last kind of component is to understand consumers. Some people want to get back and get back to restaurants and shopping and that kind of environment. Some are still a little bit reluctant. And so it's going to be important to have a lot of those measures in place to have some confidence for consumers to get back into retail and restaurant shopping environments. So again, I think the action plan, you can look at a lot of ideas and best practices that you can really utilize to help improve their business climate and move towards that recovery and move hopefully towards more of a kind of a robust recovery from the pandemic. Next. And it certainly has been a lot of impacts during the past 14 months. And so, unemployment, huge drop off in April of last year. And while people have kind of come back and they've hired some folks back, there's still a lot of furloughs out there. There's still a lot of people laid off, especially in some of those hardest hit industries, such as restaurants, and especially small restaurants, hotels, and retailers. And so I think there's been, I think unemployment is starting to get a little bit better, but there's still a long ways to go. Downsizing and businesses closing. Some have closed temporarily, some have closed for good. And so I think it's really kind of understanding that impact that this pandemic has had on the business community. And then governments, especially cities, they've just had this huge wave of impact in terms of revenues. Sales tax has been down, some greater for other cities than some. That's depending on your locale, and it seems like the coastal cities have had a greater impact than some of the inland cities. But it's sales tax, it's transit occupancy tax, bed tax, it's fees, all those things, all those revenue streams have been significantly down for a lot of cities. And it's the impact that it's had on all those retailers and restaurants, and all the bankruptcies that have happened last year and then already in 2021. Here's just a list of all the restaurants, or just some of the restaurants that have filed for bankruptcy the past year and a half. And so it has been pretty significant. And some of these are pretty well-known names of restaurants and retailers that have really struggled. And this doesn't even take into consideration all the small businesses. Those independent restaurants have been and retailers have been significantly impacted by this pandemic. If you look at this, go back one slide. If you look at Coresight, they reported that last year there was 8,741 retail stores that closed in 2020, and they're anticipating it can be as many as 10,000 that could close here in 2021. So recovery is happening, but the impacts are still there, and they're still feeling that, and they're still facing that. So I think it's really important to work with your business community and on ways that you can help them recover. Next. A lot of these things are going to be kind of the new normal. And so I think cities need to anticipate that as we start to recover, we're not going to go back necessarily to what it used to be. It's going to be a process, going to take some time. I think it's great to see that the governor and counties and are moving towards that recovery and reopening of the economy and businesses. I think that's a really positive thing. We're looking forward to that, especially as we move towards that the middle of June. But there's a lot of changes in how retailers and restaurants and hotels and other lodging facilities and entertainment venues are really going to have to kind of change in terms of how they operate to still deal with this. And then a lot of those things will become the new normal. Next. So there's a lot of kind of action steps that we advocate in putting into your action plan. So I'm gonna let Angela go through a few of these, and then I'll pick up some too.
Thank you, Barry. Hello, everyone. So as Barry touched upon, we're all facing this new normal, and to adjust to the new normal, it's essential for cities and communities to proactively work with their businesses. Over the past year, many of us have been just in a kind of reactionary mode, responding to changes as they come, putting out fires, and literally for California, up in Northern California, Southern California, we had the wildfires late last year. So again, it's time now just to sit down, kick off this recovery action plan. And the core of this is to create a core economic recovery team. And we're suggesting this consists of several council members, city staff, key stakeholders in the business community. And these can be members of your local chambers of commerce or downtown associations if you currently have them. And keep in mind, you want the number of the participants to be manageable, as this will be a working group. And the purpose of the group really is to come up with programs, policies, ideas that will help our business community. Next slide. And because your recovery team should not operate in a vacuum, we recommend creating task force groups or subcommittees to brainstorm ideas and to provide an assessment of their specific business sector or types. And again, these groups can be tailored to your community makeup, but the most common ones that we see would be your restaurants, retailers, grocery markets and drugstores, leisure, lodging and hospitality, and manufacturing, distribution, logistics, if that's applicable. Next slide. And again, as I mentioned earlier, use these groups to get a true assessment of what's going on in the business sectors. And again, you can tailor it to your community's makeup. And again, these are the typical groups that you should be targeting. Next slide. And then another important step, and this goes back to ensuring consumer confidence in supporting local businesses, is to understand the need for implementing new safety measures and getting that information out to the community. And really, it's important to stay up to date on all the different guidelines being set forth by CDC, the state, and the county, and sometimes some are more restrictive than others. And then it's important to educate your business owners, employees, and the customers. Right now, it's still 6-foot spacing, implementing and maintaining regular sanitizing practices, and continued use of drive-throughs. So if your community hasn't had that, possibly looking to encourage drive-throughs, and the different delivery practices. Right now, it's the use of QR codes for menus so that you're not handling, or the workers aren't handling actually paper menus. And then, again, working with restaurants to implement outdoor dining opportunities, especially to take advantage of the warmer weather. Next slide. And then working with your shopping center owners. Many times the larger shopping centers have solid management groups, but it's still important to reach out to them to make them aware of what you're doing and to have more of a cohesive community plan. And then it's important to engage with the smaller strip centers in your community, if you have them, the neighborhood shopping centers, because they're likely the ones that have had service tenants, service uses that have been greatly impacted over the year with the pandemic and all the shutdown orders, and they're going to need your help. Next slide. And I'll turn it back over to Barry.
Yeah, just a few more action steps that we advocate including in your action plan. One is really to kind of engage the business community through business visitation programs, which you might want to start doing those just with teleconferences or phone calls, and then move on as things get better to in-person meetings, and then doing some online surveys just to understand what your community feels about in terms of going back into restaurants and going back into retailers, and what kind of confidence they have in doing that. So I think doing that is really, really important. Next. And then using social media, I think that's a huge thing for cities right now, and use that as a tool to really promote all the reopening of your businesses, but then get their feedback too about what do they want to see to get them back into stores and restaurants in that kind of environment. Next. We've been involved in helping create a lot of small business relief grant programs, and I think there's going to be more to come, opportunities through the American Rescue Plan to help fund these. And so, these small businesses, they're really hurting. They're hanging on, they're trying to survive. And so I think having the ability to have grant programs, it may only be $5,000, but it can get them kind of over the hump sometimes and get them going. And so I think, you know, having those are really important for small businesses to have them be able to recover now that times are getting a little bit better. Next. And then, so these are kind of a couple longer term strategies. And so one is to look at ways that you can do some mixed use opportunities in your community. This is really prevalent before the pandemic. I think it's going to be really important as we move into more of that new normal. You know, downtown areas, I think it's important to look to do more mixed use and incorporate multifamily residential into your downtown areas or adjacent to your downtown areas, creating more rooftops and consumers to help your existing retailers and restaurants recover even more. You know, we've worked with a number of cities in their downtowns to look at, you know, creating more of that 15 to 18 hour environment, so that it's not just an 8 to 5 environment. You have activity happening in the evening too, and so that having that vibrant activity is really going to help your existing businesses recover even quicker. And then just understand that, you know, teleworking is going to continue. It may just be part of the time, but I think that it's going to be slow for all people to kind of move back into that office environment. So that really impacts how you dine and how you shop, and your entertainment habits are really kind of closer to home now. Next. And then just continue to monitor the situation after you put a plan in place. But you know, do it a month out, 6 months out, 12 months out, and really kind of look to see how your recovery is progressing, and be able to pivot and make adjustments. And you know, I think restaurants especially are they really need some help to recover. And so, you know, Angela talked about earlier, you know, the drive-throughs. I think a lot of cities kind of frowned on drive-throughs. A lot of the restaurants that had drive-through opportunities, that's what kept them in business during this past 14 months. Outdoor dining. I mean, a lot of folks didn't have outdoor dining, didn't have patio spaces, and they had to kind of do makeshift things. I don't think you'll ever see very many restaurants get approved, new restaurants in California, without a patio space. I think we've learned from this pandemic how important it is to have that outdoor dining experience. And so I think it's gonna be a must. And I think you're gonna see much more drive-through use for restaurants, especially kind of the fast casual restaurant was the growing field, and still kind of is. And a lot of those folks are going to drive-throughs. It's a very important component in their business plan. Even with grocery stores, you know, a lot of folks went to using online services for their grocery service needs, and picking us, and drugstores too. And then I think just it could be much more mixed use development. I think that needs to be incorporated into this too.
So this is just kind of touching upon all the different things that we've talked about and the needs. And this is kind of the new normal that we're seeing around us. Outdoor dining, parklets, you know, so they're taking up actual street parking stalls in order to have the businesses be able to operate. Outdoor fitness classes, because gyms and fitness clubs, centers were closed for so long. Curbside pickup, also, as I mentioned before, QR codes for menus. I'm seeing a lot of communities allowing or letting businesses have in their municipal parking lots short-term parking spaces for pickup for the different businesses. And again, the buzzword these days for businesses is pivot. And cities and communities need to be able to assist the small businesses to pivot and to stay flexible in order to sustain themselves as this all continues in the new norm. Next. And again, part of that with a small business owner, many times they're just dealing with how to operate day to day. So it behooves, you know, the cities and communities to really provide as much guidance to businesses as possible, develop a reopening toolkit, which includes information on employee training, health and safety measures, education for the public. Again, these are just some examples that we've helped communities put together, but basically it's trying to assist businesses with this kind of plug and play document or package of things that they can just begin incorporating without them having to do all of the research and the work pulling it together. And next.
You know, I think we all heard that the American Rescue Plan Act was approved. It was approved on March 11th, and which was the 1 year anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic being declared a global pandemic. And so it was it's a huge stimulus plan coming from the federal government. So it's $1.9 trillion in total. And we've got $8 billion in funding coming to California cities. Every incorporated city in California will get an allocation from the American Rescue Plan. Entitlement cities will, 50,000 or more in population, will get theirs directly from the federal government. And those non-entitlement cities that have 50,000 or less in population will get those through the state. And so still not quite sure how the state's going to do that and the timing of that, but you know, we hear that it's going to be fairly smooth. We're hoping for that. As I mentioned earlier, the rulemaking is still being done. There's some broad parameters on what this money can be used for, but there's, you know, the devil's in the details. There's still some stuff that needs to be worked out as the federal government comes up with some of those rules and regulations for the use and compliance with this funding. And so having strategies is really important. Talking about doing that now is really important, but having the ability to pivot, and Angela talked about that too. Pivot is, and having that flexibility is really, really important now. Next. So there's a lot of funding that we know is going to be allowed, and so the details might not be there, but it's one of the biggest ones will be cities can have some reimbursement of revenues that they've experienced as a result of the pandemic. So showing your sales tax loss, and certainly HdL can be a big part of doing that. But then looking at, you know, loss of revenue from TOT revenue, from fees, from other things that your city has experienced, and being able to use some of the American Rescue Plan funding for that. And then a big part of what they're advocating, the federal government, is to help those business sectors most impacted by the pandemic. And so, you know, grants to small businesses to help recovery and support that recovery for small businesses, I think should be part of your strategy. To look at infrastructure and capital improvements. There's another piece of the rescue plan that will include infrastructure and capital improvements. So there's a couple of different ways you can go after that. And then technology upgrades. It's looking at how you might use new technology to incorporate into your business practices with cities to be more efficient, and I think that's going to be an important part too. And I think Connor can talk about that a little bit when he gets in his presentation later. And so again, you know, I think to analyze that revenue loss that your city experienced from the pandemic is going to be that kind of that first step for cities. And it's starting to work on a strategy to utilize the funding that's coming. And so you want to involve your city council in that. You want to involve your executive teams for your cities. And then you want to involve some of those key stakeholders in the community, chambers of commerce and other folks, into how we can most effectively utilize this funding that's coming. It's going to come in some this year in terms of funding, and then more next year. So I think it's putting together a strategy that really works and fits the needs in your community. But we're advocating you don't wait, that you start to do that now, start to strategize and put those plans in place right now on how you can use those monies. And I think we'll take our questions, Angela and I, after Connor goes through his presentation, and then we can take questions at the end for everybody.
Great, thank you, Barry and Angela. First question in the chat box. I'm noticing many restaurants immediately abandon outdoor dining when they were able to reopen indoors. How do we encourage them to keep that and increase the activity level outside that helps surrounding businesses?
I think it's important to have a balance of that, but you need to make those outdoor dining experiences. People want to use those, and so I think it's going to be important to have to build in improvements in your outdoor dining experiences that that people want to see in terms of, summertime it's having shade, wintertime it's having heaters, it's having some covering. You can't, it's difficult to have outdoor dining when you get rain. Some in the Northern California cities especially encounter those challenges. So I think it's important to kind of work on those improvements and have cities have the flexibility to work with their restaurants so that they can continue to use those outdoor dining facilities, but make them inviting so that people want to go to those spaces. And I personally really enjoy going to outdoor dining spaces, but you got to have the right environment too. It's a little bit challenging when you're doing it in parking spaces and parking lots and or out in the street. Those were short-term fixes that everybody had to deal with and just try to get by those really tough periods. I think it's taking those outdoor dining experiences and making them kind of longer term. And again, it's becoming that new normal. I think making those improvements work for everybody.
Yeah, and some of the communities I've worked with, I'm working with here in Northern California, because there has been rain on and off. Some of these communities have launched grant programs for outdoor dining, which helps reimburse businesses for their purchases for a canopy or tent and whatnot. So again, there's the incentive for these businesses to invest in kind of longer term planning and more comfortable dining opportunities for their clients. And then there's street closures, or depending on the geographic kind of setup, maybe it's a weekend street closure for your downtown, which makes it a really more inviting environment for families to come down. Maybe there's live music or whatnot. So again, as Barry had mentioned, it's kind of bringing together a more inviting environment and making it a draw for your community.
I think what Angela talked about there, I think it's having those amenities that people want to come for, and the idea of having special events, having music, having those things too. That's really, really important to create that environment. It's the same thing with downtowns. You want to create that environment for people to come there that makes it special and unique for you to go to there. And so I think that outdoor dining, having that is going to be really huge to continue that, but have the amenities that people want to have and visit.
Great, thank you. And you talked about reopening toolkits and the importance of those toolkits. How do you have any tips or suggestions for those perhaps agencies that are hesitant to provide those for any number of reasons like liability purposes? Any suggestions on how to engage and work with their communities?
Well, again, the document is really best practices, or kind of what the current guidelines are. So if you're upfront and you explain, while this is a compilation of things set forth from the CDC, from the state, from the county, as a publication at that time, but then encourage them to click back on the links. But again, for the most part, they are best practices on, regular cleaning and sanitizing. And so those are things we suspect are going to have longevity. But again, for some of the things that are kind of going on in terms of the tiers and reopening, again, let them know as you're working with the businesses, this is what's currently available. you know, you have to stay on top of it. Maybe there's an email blast that your city can send out regularly. Make sure these businesses or the managers are on those distribution lists so that they can get updates on a regular basis. And I do, again, feel like it's a helpful tool that you are providing it to the business owners versus them having to scramble and look at all of these kind of different places as to where to get all of this information.
And I think you can put enough qualifiers in there too that these are just kind of best practices. This is guidance, and so you know these things are changing almost weekly now in terms of of the different colors and the things that you can do. And so, but these businesses, you know, they're just trying to operate. And so I think the more guidance you can give them, all the better.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box. If anyone has any questions, otherwise, yes, Connor will be next.
Sounds great. And you can all feel free to type in questions too if you have any more that you can think of along the way. We'll have a little session at the end for Q&A as well too. All right, so business and lodging tax and the revenue that's impacted through that. And I have a little piece on how ARPA can also assist as well. All right, so here's some graphs from the EDD office, and you can see the unemployment rate just from December 2019 to 2020. Huge difference. I mean, we're up, you know, 5 to 6%. And then the payroll jobs have definitely decreased as well. So in that sector, I'll discuss a little bit further, those payroll jobs, the standard, you know, the 8 to 4, 8 to 5 jobs that we spoke about a little bit earlier have changed. And they're either you're an independent contractor, you're working on your own, or you're on the unemployment ticket. So the job cycle has changed a bit as well. We did see that there could be an uneven recovery as well for that. You can see some of the graphs on the right and how they've changed from January 2020 to December 2020, with the left side being pre-pandemic, the right side being, I guess, coming out of the pandemic, if you want to call it that. And it's changed significantly. If you look at restaurant spending, we've been talking about earlier, I mean, we had huge numbers there. That's gone way down. And those numbers, as we discussed, were mainly for those to-go or the drive-in type situations or cities that have adapted to outdoor dining. And as we bring in, you know, those sort of changes, we'll be seeing the numbers come back up. But in all sectors, for the most part, they have sort of decreased. The home building is interesting, as you've seen. You know, the home prices have gone through the roof, higher than ever. The lumber costs have tripled, and it's just been an interesting experience. If you want to build a deck, now is probably not the right time to do it, even though you have that extra stimulus money. You might want to hold off a little bit further and see things stabilizing out. One thing that isn't on there too is gas. When the pandemic hit, we saw great gas prices, and now we're seeing them, you know, they're going to be reaching $4 a gallon, I would say, by the end of summer. So hopefully we can get, you know, some sort of grasp on that as well too. All right, so let's talk about lodging. So in this section, it'll be about the hotels or short-term rentals. So as you know, we've had COVID wipe out nearly about 10 years of industry growth. We were growing consistently for those 10 years in the tourism market, and then COVID hit and we saw a huge flux in that. What happens in that are a loss of jobs, whether the hotels shut down altogether or they couldn't even afford to have their management staff that typically would be part of that staffing functionality, whether it's a Hilton, a Marriott, or your mom and pop hotels or bed and breakfasts as well. So with that, we lose industry knowledge. You know, those people that have been there for years and years, that either the hotels can't afford to keep them, or You know, they've gone on to jobs that can, commit to their sort of salary range that they were getting pre-pandemic. So with that, you lose auditing, you lose your operating procedures, and the familiarity with your local taxes and your local sort of codes and laws that the cities have. So keep an eye on that. It's a big thing that we're going to see with those new jobs as they rehire, or even people that have, been hired since the beginning of the year. Do they have that same sort of expertise? As you can see on the chart below, this is the decrease in gross rent. So in Southern California, it hasn't been impacted that much, but as Barry mentioned, the coastal is the biggest one. So as those recover, those higher end ones are the ones you're going to be seeing recover quickest. We've also seen that those higher sort of expensed hotels, your luxury hotels, are going to recover quicker because those people typically have the money to spend to recover with those larger luxurious properties than your basic, your Motel 6 or La Quinta or things of that nature that appeal to the standard rates. We also saw that there were 22% fewer rentals in STR functionality. So for the most part, if you've traveled, you've probably stayed in an STR if you've gone with your family to the mountains or to a vacation spot that like Yosemite or a national park, things like that. The STRs did get impacted as well, and they did see that decrease, even though it was sort of often safer because you're in your own little community with your family or your friends or loved ones, opposed to that large industrial commercial hotel. And as well too, the business travel is going to remain the slowest to recover. That's impacted forever. I mean, we're going to see the telecommuting. We're going to see people, instead of going on site, traveling across the country to visit with a client, they're going to be doing it on Zoom like we are right now. I mean, we're not having any in-person meetings. We've seen that with conferences. We've seen that throughout the whole functionality of the sector. So that's going to continue to stay that way and be the slowest to recover. And here's just some more information as well. Things that some of our clients that we've worked with have done. Penalty waivers and tax deferrals is a big one. And we spoke about grant coordination, right? So the ARPA funding, essentially what it is as long as it's going to be impacting your local business, your local economy, then for the most part, all the webinars and information that I've seen, that's what you can use it for. I mean, whether it's a new sewer project, because that's going to impact your local downtown districts or commercial developments, or it's, new sort of software technology that Barry mentioned, or just getting information out to the local business community. That's essentially what your ARPA funds are going to be. And if you don't stay on top of that or want to utilize those funds, they're going to be gone. So it's good to get your ducks in a row right now and really think of things outside the box and how those funds can be used. And for the most part, as long as they're impacting the business community, the economy in your city or county, that's really what you can secure that funding for. We talked about the health measures at hotels. They've had the same thing, right? They've changed procedures. I know I went down to the south a couple times during the pandemic, and there are keyless entries with your phone. No more hotel bars, no more breakfast, all you can eat or whatever. They'd have a sack breakfast, or you choose, hey, I want a cereal and a yogurt, and that's it. They're not going to be coming to you and waiting for you to do an omelet or pancakes or things like that nature. So things have changed. We saw it with housekeeping. I mean, instead of coming in each day, they would come in once a week if you're staying there for a week, or if you're staying there for a couple days, they don't come at all. The pool activities have slowed down as well. They've also been limited per capacity or just not having pool activities at all, really. Another big thing too is that I know in California, with, I believe it's called Project Turnkey, is the conversion of hotel properties or motel sort of properties to low-income housing. So these shuttered motels or things like that that may not have been around or may not have been able to sustain through the pandemic, they're using that sort of hotel unit ability to house low-income housing, whether it's for those communities in need or even for the homeless communities and things like that. So you can see here, we've had personal income shifts for the past few decades. That's gone down. However, we've seen that sort of trend go back up during the pandemic, knowing that it's good to have a little nest egg. It's good to have some savings. In this decade, from 2020 all the way through, you've been seeing a lot more savings than ever. In this last stimulus check, more people have put it into savings than actually spent it for the economy. So it's good and bad. You want to stimulate the economy, but at the same time, you also want to, still be able to save and be able to suffer through, or if you have to suffer through, you have some sort of nest egg in there. And of course, services, right? So services have increased. The goods are going to be increasing right now that we've seen in the last few months, but services have just skyrocketed. And be aware, California is looking to possibly have a service tax. They've been talking about that for the last few years. It might come, I'd say in the next 10 to 15 years, we might see a service tax in California. All right, let's shift to business tax, right? So we have a new way of doing business. We've spoken about remote working, and that increase or that leads to a decrease in commercial property demand, right? So we've for instance, HdL, we've had many different commercial properties in California and across the US, but I've been working from home for the last year. I've come in the office maybe a dozen times max in that time. And so you have that decrease in commercial property demand, less needs for those spaces available. So what does that mean as well? Well, that's going to shift your city and county master plan design. You might not be having many commercial properties anymore because of that. And you're going to use those commercial properties to build housing. We have a housing crisis, so that's a good place to start. Or, shift to that sort of mixed use development as well. Hybrid working, you might come in the office 1 or 2 days a week, or you might stay at home the other few days. That's going to be probably the biggest option moving forward. I don't think we're ever going to see the full demand of going in the office 5 days a week or a 410 like we've seen before. We're going to see a lot of hybrid working. And that means, and that's going to lead to apportionment concerns, right? So apportionment was not common prior to the pandemic, unless you're talking about cannabis or things like that. So municipalities who allocate those gross receipts on your licenses or taxes should monitor and prepare for solutions for that the apportionment type ability. So, for instance, I've been working from home. HdL has, like I said, multiple locations. You can even talk about, your own city, right? And we talked about what we're going to eat. That's been done, a more localized sort of effort. So the same thing with your working abilities. How do you, take care of these cities and counties that are collecting these gross receipts if somebody's working in a different city or county than they were before, right? So if I have an office in LA, but I work in Orange County, who's going to get that money? Is it going to be the Orange County city? Is it going to be the LA County city that's going to get that apportionment money? So these are questions that we're going to be really sort of needing to look at. We haven't seen much in right now, but be prepared. There's always those friendly lawyers out there that are trying to, sue us. So we might see this in some litigation in the future as well. All right, and then just some couple of actions of how to use the ARPA funding or your local ways to assist, right? So tax deferrals and waivers. I'm sure a lot of you have used this already, but it's a great way to educate the business community of these programs, so if you are going to waive penalties, let them know. Use that ARPA funding to let them know, right? And I'll talk about that and how to use that a little bit in this slide too. tax studies and ordinance reviews. You can use ARPA funding for that. How to have an equitable tax business base, right? So we talked about those commercial and the apportionment type of solutions. We need to reevaluate tax studies. A lot of cities and counties haven't had a tax code change or evaluated it in 15, 20, 40 years even. I mean, we've seen really outdated terminology and the way that taxes have been collected. It might be a good way to, like I said, have that equitable tax base. And that's the way to really, pursue that to the public, because we're not doing it to tax more. We're doing it to have a fair sort of taxation to everybody all the way around and have that business community thrive, not be, challenged with these tax sort of burdens that they have. And monitor, these revenue sources, right? So we looked at those sales tax trends. We looked at the business tax trends, the gross receipts. If you're collecting business tax data on gross receipts, you're going to have that right in front of you. You're going to be able to pull reports from your business tax system to have those gross receipts and see which industries are recovering and which ones that we really need to pay more attention to, and maybe, give some more education for the funding. And then one of the big ones here is ensure that data is captured. If you don't have business license programs or business registration programs, now's the time to do it and use that ARPA funding for it. If you don't have online ability for the businesses to pay, use the ARPA funding for that. It was a great way for email blasts, right? So we've had so many of our different clients that ask us, hey, we want to email blast our business community. We don't know how. Well, do you collect it with your business licensing or registration? Oh, yeah, we do. Well, or no, we don't. Well, you should do it. You should get that information, collect it, allow them to pay online and collect the emails so you can sort of give the information out for grant funding, for, city events that are coming on that you might not have and known otherwise. I have some friends up and out of state in Seattle and Portland area that don't collect business licensing or don't collect, they have no information. So they want to create a business registration, right? So because they don't have property owner information, they don't have business contact information, who the managers are, who these people are that they can reach out and either send information to or send them email blasts or get in contact with, or that ARPA funding. This is a great way to utilize it. And of course, monitor new legislation. There's always new legislation coming down from California. Whether it's good or bad, it's going to affect us in some way. A great one that we spoke about earlier was, hey, for those of you that have gone to a Mexican restaurant, there was Cinco de Mayo yesterday. So many of these restaurants last year and this year are doing alcohol to go, right? That was never a possibility in the past. Alcohol to go is going to be a new law that is being looked at and moving through the state legislature right now. And it was a great way for these restaurants to recover the alcohol that was, that was lost. People that would go to the bars and hang out and be there after work. Well, they lost all of that until they came up with, hey, you can bring these, margaritas or sort of other items to go and take them home with you. There'll be sort of mandates on can't drink and drive and things like that. But it's another great way to take care of a need that the public wanted, but we couldn't utilize in the past. And that is it on my end as well. So any questions?
Great, thank you, Connor. Let's see. We have a question here in the Q&A box. I think this might be for Connor. What are your thoughts about taxing the Airbnbs and vacation rental industry, which in some cities have gone without paying taxes for temporary occupancy?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways on how we've seen that industry work, right? So first off, is it allowed in your municipality? That's the first thing. Usually, if you don't have it in the code, it's not, usually the code lists commercial properties or commercially zoned properties as the only way to have a sort of hotel type ability. So you might want to change the code for that. It is a need. It's happening in every single city. It's not like it's going to go away just because your code doesn't allow it. It's there, right? So some cities have compliance sort of efforts. You can do um, the funding for those compliance efforts. You can utilize the funding for the collection of those TOT payments as well. And if you have the compliance efforts and it's not allowed, well, you know how to tackle them, how to get sort of your code enforcement officers out there, talk to the public and educate them. Hey, this isn't allowed in our community. Oh, but by the way, you're still renting it, so you still owe us TOT for that because that hasn't gone away, whether it's legal or not legal. So it's really up to you and the needs of your community. Some communities don't want it, and it's fine, and you don't need it. Some of them do. It's a great way to earn revenue, but like I said, everybody has it. It's in your community. It's affecting your community. So you're going to need to figure out what sort of aspects and drives that you're going to need for your community to actually legalize that or not. Another thing too, there are things called Airbnb contracts that cities get into or counties get into with Airbnb. We don't advise that you get into those contracts because Airbnb is very strict and regulatory. And unless you have a city attorney that looks through those contracts and gives a lot of pushback, it's benefit the Airbnb community, not your city. And often it's going to say, hey, if we have an Airbnb client, your code enforcement can't go out there and regulate certain measures on these local properties. You can't enforce them to have a smoke detector. You can't enforce them to have parking regulations, things like that, if you get into these contracts with Airbnb. So be careful on that. Sometimes they're good, but if you are going to get into it, really look over those sort of contracts before signing on the dotted line.
Very important. Thank you for addressing that. Barry mentioned, the reduction in commercial retail businesses, but as you mentioned, Connor, with regards to the telecommuting impacts and what do you see as the long-term impact with commercial vacancy rates, with less demand as people have been telecommuting?
Well, it's an interesting thing because right in November, the state voted down a like the split roll tax increase for commercial properties, and so the voters voted it down, and they were in favor of commercial property owners because it could have been passed on, down to you if you have a grocery store and restaurant, et cetera. So that impact might come around again. We might see a new sort of a referendum coming to the ballot. That will be targeting commercial properties. Also, yeah, we need to figure out what we're going to do with these empty and vacant spaces, right? We have a housing shortage. We keep having, back to legislation, we keep having sort of these referendums that come out to impact or to have low impact housing and, how we're going to do it. These vacant commercial properties could be a great place to do it. A lot of times they're in an industrial zone. So they're out of the way. A lot of the cities that don't want low income housing that the state is mandating will actually have stuck them in industrial type zones because they call them, the riffraff or things like that, which they're not. And these low income housing sort of builds are great, brand new housing. They look awesome and they're better than some of the regular housing that we have out there. But that's a good place to, sort of shift that low income housing is to the commercial properties.
Yeah, just if I can piggyback on that too, I think you're going to see a lot more of those, some of those distressed older properties, especially some of the older strip centers and some of the older shopping centers that have a lot of vacancies. I think you're going to see more mixed use. I talked about that. I think that really kind of needs to go into your economic recovery action plan. That's an opportunity for some of these, and sometimes these older properties, they're third and fourth generation owners, so they're not the people that developed them originally, and so and lots of times they're family trusts and whatever else, and so they're just trying to see revenue. So when they lose that revenue opportunity, they're looking at ways that they can replace that. And so I think residential is one of the huge ones in terms of kind of interjecting more revenue to a commercial property, and I think even medical and health care related facilities are other mixed use opportunities that can go in, and that you can put productive uses back into them. So I think you're going to see a lot more of those mixed use concepts go forward. But as Connor talked about, I think we prefer to call them affordable housing rather than low income housing. But there's opportunities to go ahead and we need to produce a lot more housing in California, and especially affordable housing. So I think those are opportunities to do those mixed use environments, to be creative in the cities that are looking to kind of look outside the envelope, push that envelope a little bit, to productively reuse these commercial properties.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of that with the malls, even pre-pandemic. You know, a lot of the malls that had vacancies had to rethink how they're going to operate, right? They might have a trampoline park in there instead of, you know, a big box retailer, or, you know, they might bring a gym instead of, you know, a big box retailer. So we saw that with the mall. So with the same thing, we'll have to adapt with commercial properties. I mean, in my little section of town where I live, we have 2 dry cleaners. One went out about 6 months ago, went out of business. The other one I found out is going out of business in 2 weeks. So my section of town will have no more dry cleaners. Well, why is that? Because you're working from home. I mean, so who needs to wear a suit if you're working at home anymore? Who needs to, you know, to press your pants or ties or shirts? And these dry cleaners are in little strip malls that are going to be vacant, and we either to really rethink how we're going to, you know, suffice with them. There are also churches that are coming into these things too. We can't just depend on the restaurant industry, because there's only a finite amount of restaurants that we can stick in these places.
Yeah, we're involved. We're doing a peer review of an economic benefit analysis for the city of Newark. So they're looking at their mall, the New Park Mall there, and so most of their anchors are gone, and so they're bringing a Costco there. They're bringing 1,500 new residential units, and so that's driving the redevelopment of that entire mall. And so, but they're moving away from what was, you know, a regional mall that was anchored by 4 anchors, and 3 of those 4 anchors are not around anymore. And so Costco will bring activity and energy, but the residential will bring activity. And so that gives them the money then to go ahead and redevelop the rest of the property. And it's a great location. So I think you're going to look at more and more of those things. You know, malls were suffering before. And so I think it's reinventing themselves and becoming, integrating, you know, more entertainment that works, more restaurants that work, food halls, you know, all those kinds of things are going to be the future. But that mixed use is really the future.
Great, thank you. The next question that we have is, I'm not sure what the context is, so here goes. Does HdL or counties use NAICS, North American Industrial Classification System codes, as the federal government does?
So I know on our software side of things and how we track it for licensing, we use NAIC. Now there's SIC and NAICS, and they're both similar. The NAIC ones are way behind the times. I think they've been updated in 30 years. For instance, cannabis is not part of NAIC codes, and also it's a federal, legal drug there. But at the same time, the SIC works. If you have certain bills that are passed down from the state legislature, like SB 205 regarding stormwater, that's also an important bill that you need to maintain the NAIC codes for. So it is extremely important that every city and county in California capture these NAIC codes with business registration or licensing, because right now it is state law that you have to report your businesses and what ones fall under that stormwater bill for capturing the codes.
Great, thank you. And next question, great presentation. Will the PowerPoint be available? Barry, feel free to send us an email afterwards if you want us to send that out. We certainly can after the presentation.
We'd love to do that, and we'll get it too. I think we'll probably have it on our website too for our company if people want to look at it there too.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And with a couple minutes left, if anybody else has any questions, please type that in the Q&A box. In the meantime, Barry, Angela, and Connor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Great presentation and a lot of informative information, best practices. We really appreciate it. Barry, welcome back. Again, as I mentioned, we like to have our former presidents back with us, so thank you for joining us. And on behalf of the Board of Directors, I want to thank HdL for their continuous support of MMASC and our programming. So please pass that along to your leadership. We really appreciate your support these past few years. And with that, I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A box. So we will be concluding this webinar this morning, and appreciate everyone joining us again. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. If you have any questions, we'll provide Barry's, Angela's, and Connor's information in our follow-up email to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy. Thank you, everyone.